Mateusz, and I work in Schibsted in Krakow. And I'm usually interested in everything related with React. And this is going to be Redux is dead, long live Redux. So, guess how I wanted to start this presentation? I wanted to ask all of you for the show of hands who is using Redux in your projects. But we already did that. So I wanted to ask you, raise your hands if you're satisfied with using Redux in your projects. Okay. So I've been using Redux in the projects in my team for about 2 years right now, I think, and I'm actually very happy with it. The team likes the architecture built upon it, and it was always a huge help in developing new features, right? So I'm pretty confident about it. And of course, we have React in our projects. We have Redux, React Router, the whole shebang. And all this works pretty nice, right? But sometimes when I'm browsing through the internet, I notice articles like this one or this one. Or my favorite, this one, where it's actually not from the Redux repo, but from Redux Tank. But someone was unsure if the project is still alive. But the answer from Dan was that the project is finished, so it's fine, it works, needs no further development, right? But this happens. The articles with headlines like that usually come around. And are they true? Does this mean that the architecture I invested so much time into will soon become obsolete? Should I just jump to the next big thing? Well, I think all of these are legit questions, so I wanted to find an answer for them, and I wanted to give you an answer. What I decided to do is take 2 steps back and go back to basics and kinda remind myself, why did we start to use Redux in the first place? Why did we all jump to this Redux hype train and when it became so popular? So the first place I visited was the official docs for Redux. I think they are I like the docs because they have a nice balance of like API, description of use cases, common use cases, and also a little bit of theory. So I went to the theory part, right? And there's this page in the docs that I particularly like, and it's called the 3 principles. And why I like it is because it gives you, or tells you about this core basic ideas upon which the Redux library was actually built, right? And the 3 principles are, you have a state that should be a single source of truth for your application. This state is read-only, so you cannot change it in any way. But if you actually want to make change in your application, you do so by writing pure reducers that are pure functions. They will return a new version of the state, and that's how your app will work, right? You would usually re-render React, because that's what usually people do. So this is not like a huge amount of information, right? This is pretty basic. But even after looking at this 3 bullet points, you can kinda, I hope, get the gist of Redux, right? And for me, this is, you should not be able to directly mess with your state. You should be in control of your state and it should be predictable, not just being changed all the time by different pieces of code. All right, now let's move back to past a little bit. And how many of you have seen this talk? Someone remember it? This is a talk done by Dan Abramov in 2015 when he introduced a Redux library to a wider audience. The library was somewhat popular before this, but after it became much more popular. What I like about this talk is that if you look at the title, there is no Redux in the title of this talk. It's just live React, hot reloading with time travel. So this talk is first and foremost about developer tooling, developer workflow. And I quite like it. Because Dan came up to the stage and he said that I had this idea for an ideal front-end developer workflow, and it includes hot reloading, right? And hot reloading works awesome with React. That's how he was able to use it. because, and I think someone mentioned it on this conference already, React does not modify your state, and state being DOM in this case, right? You kind of declaratively describe what should happen, React will do so. So it works nicely with hot module reloading. But where this breaks is on with state, right? Stateful code is much harder to work with hot module reloading. And after describing the problem, Dan then says, so I came up with this solution, and the solution being Redux. So I like it because he doesn't just say, hey, this is Redux, let's all use it. He said that I have a problem, and this is a nice solution to the problem, right? Why don't we try to write pure functions that will describe how our state should change instead of actually changing it all around? Because you will get hot module reloading, you will get time travel debugging, you will get a whole lot of other fancy things that are pretty helpful in your day-to-day workflow. And this, combined with the 3 principles from earlier, this is for me the answer to the question of why. Why should I add Redux to my applications? Why is it cool? Why is it useful? It's because we decided that state is often the most complex part of my application, and how about we do something about it? How about we try to look at the state and get better control? Make our state more predictable, start to understand why the state changed, when and how. All right, so we are now armed with this knowledge, and let's move back to the headlines, to the problem that we saw earlier. Let's review the cases. So from the headlines that I shown you guys earlier, I kind of picked the 3 most popular, I think, suspects that keep appearing in these talks. In the headlines in articles on Medium. And this is Context API, GraphQL, and React Suspense. But today, unfortunately, I don't have enough time to go very deep into all 3 of those, so I will just review one. I will review Context API because I think it's an interesting case. Okay, so what is React Context, actually? It's not a new feature. It's a feature that has been with us in React for a very, very long time. But recently, it got a new public API with the release of, I think, React 16.3, if I'm not mistaken. Facebook team gave us new, better public API for context, and now it's considered to be stable. So if you go to the documentation and you look why is context useful, then you can see that context gives us a way to pass the data throughout the component tree without actually explicitly passing it into every single component, right? So the way this works is that usually you will have something called a context provider quite high up your render tree, and you will take up some data, and if you want to pass it somewhere below, then you can have a component, create a consumer of context in the component, and then that's how it gets data, right? So it's sort of a way to inject a data or props to your component. So you can kind of see how this is similar to Connect from React Redux, yeah? You have one global state, and you can inject the props to whenever you need them, to use them. But I think that's where the similarities end, actually. There are 2 problems with this approach. First problem is that context shouldn't actually be used to take your data and inject it. At least that's what the docs say. Context should be a helper for you when you're trying to do internationalization or theming, things like that. Things where you have this extra bit of data where a component might need it to add it, to understand how it should render itself. Yeah, should not be really used as a main way that you are injecting data into your app. But that is not even the biggest problem. This is the big problem. Context doesn't really give us any way to handle complexity of our state. It's only for injecting props. And so if you really think about it, the 2 solutions actually solve different problems. And I know why the articles constantly keep appearing, and I know why people are talking about it. Because very often people would put Redux in simple apps with simple state, and they don't really need Redux. to be honest. That's why when they look at context API and has much less boilerplate, then they think, hey, I could probably use that. And that's true, but you probably did not need Redux if it doesn't help you really that much. Okay, like I said, I don't have time for the 2 cases, but just to say a sentence about each of them. With GraphQL, the story goes that usually you only use Redux for translating the data from your REST API to how your components render. So GraphQL kind of makes this for you, so you don't really have to care about it. You just use the query the way you want it, and then people add something like Apollo or some other client, and it's quite usually helpful for the translation of the data, and it takes care of this for you. And React Suspense, you can get the data, and React will wait for the data, and it will work. Both interesting, but I'm not sure if they really help with the complexity of the state. All right. So one of the last cool sources that I wanted to share with you. This is an old article, but it's still super useful, I think. You might not need Redux. And in it, you will find how Dan Abramov describes that Redux is just another tool for a developer. And it has trade-offs. You should understand how the tool works. You should consider the trade-offs, and then add it or not. And if you are not sure, one quote from the talk, from this article, is that using local state is fine. I think a lot of people are kinda maybe afraid, or they think React state is not really the solution to go. But I'm pretty sure for simple apps and for medium-sized apps, React state will do just fine, right? All right, I told you that you might not need Redux and that you may be using it wrong. So when to actually use it? The first case is, I think, pretty simple. If you actually have complex state and you see it, or your state is very, very big, that probably Redux might be a useful solution for you. So we often have the case when we need to reuse the same data over many components or views. This would be true in big applications, for example, where you have many pages. You might have routing also, so you want to have the data, but you don't want to reload and refetch everything when the views change. When you have context of, for example, a list of articles, maybe a list of products, one product, maybe some other kind of list like featured or something. It's nice to have one global state and that you can reuse over many different view components. And finally, maybe your state is not very big or very huge. Maybe your app is not very big, but you can still have a situation where you are not really sure how your state changes, or when, or why. Maybe one change triggers a waterfall of another changes, right? And you are not sure why something happened. Then Redux is the perfect solution, because it will give you this nice flow of actions, and you can always take a look in your reducer or in your current state, from where did this change come from, which is super useful, at least in my developer workflow. Okay, so some of the things that I would like you guys to remember from this talk. If you have to remember something, always use tools that solve the problems you are actually facing, because there is no silver bullet, as people often say, and you should be able to understand what is happening with your application, where the problems or the complexity might come, and then use the tools to solve it. Don't put Redux in your apps just because it's trendy, or Medium says you should do it, or other people say you should do it. Use it as a solution to a problem if you're actually facing it. And finally, if your state is simple, and you can see that it's simple, don't be afraid of using just plain old React with React set state, because I think it's completely fine and it will work in many situations. And next time, when you see the article that something is about to replace Redux, do try to read what problems it actually solves and think about if you should be afraid or not. Because I think Redux will stay or the ideas of Redux will stay with us for at least some time still. Thank you.